I tore down her 10 marriage commandments, exposed her control campaign, refused to be managed, and reclaimed my dignity in partnership forever. Have you ever had someone hand you a laminated list of 10 commandments and expect you to follow them like gospel? That's exactly what happened to me last Thursday when I walked through my front door after work. I kicked off my shoes, loosened my tie, and headed straight for the kitchen to grab a beer. That's when I saw it, a crisp white paper perfectly centered on the refrigerator door, held up by 4 magnets like it was some kind of sacred document. The title read in bold letters, "The 10 Marriage Commandments, effective immediately." I stood there for a moment, beer halfway to my lips, thinking this had to be some kind of joke. My wife has always been organized, maybe even a little controlling at times, but this was something else entirely. I read through the list slowly, each commandment more ridiculous than the last. Thou shalt arrive home no later than 6:30 p.m., unless given prior written approval. 3. Thou shalt not make social plans without spousal consultation and agreement. 7. Thou shalt complete assigned household duties within 24 hours of notification. The list went on. 10 perfectly typed, perfectly formatted rules for how I was supposed to live in my own home. At the bottom there was even a signature line where I was apparently supposed to sign my agreement to these terms. I heard footsteps coming down the stairs. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, wearing that expression I had come to recognize as her serious business face. "Did you read it?" she asked, nodding toward the refrigerator. "Oh, I read it," I said, taking a long sip of my beer. "Interesting approach to marriage counseling. Very corporate," I added. She didn't laugh, not even a smile. "This isn't a joke. We need structure in this relationship. We need clear expectations and accountability." "Accountability," I repeated. "For what exactly? Coming home to my own house? Having dinner with my friends?" "For being a better husband," she said, walking over to stand next to the refrigerator like she was presenting a PowerPoint. "These commandments will help us both understand our roles and responsibilities." I looked at her, really looked at her, trying to figure out when my wife had turned into a corporate manager. "And what happens if I don't follow your commandments?" She pulled out her phone and showed me a notes app with a detailed list. "Violations will result in consequences. Late arrivals without approval mean no social activities for a week. Failure to complete household duties results in restriction of personal time. Repeated violations lead to more severe measures." Severe measures. I almost laughed, but the dead serious look on her face stopped me. "You're actually planning to punish me like a child?" "I'm planning to hold you accountable like an adult," she shot back. "These rules aren't unreasonable. They're about respect and partnership." I walked closer to the refrigerator and read through the list again, this time noticing details I had missed. Commandment number 4. Thou shalt not purchase items over $50 without spousal approval. Commandment number 8. Thou shalt maintain agreed-upon sleep schedule and bedtime routine. Partnership, I repeated slowly. Tell me exactly where my input was in creating these partnership rules. "I spent weeks thinking about what we needed to improve our marriage," she said. "I researched successful relationship strategies and compiled the most effective approaches." "You researched?" I nodded. "And during all this research, did you consider maybe having a conversation with your actual partner?" Her jaw tightened. "I'm having that conversation now. Sign the agreement." I looked at the signature line at the bottom of the page, then back at her. Something had shifted in the room, and it wasn't just the temperature. This wasn't about organization or structure. This was about control, complete, unquestioned control. "And if I don't sign? Then we'll have a problem," she said, her voice dropping to that tone she used when she thought she held all the cards. I set my beer down on the counter and walked over to the kitchen table, pulling out a chair. "Sit down," I said. "I don't need to sit. I need you to sign." "Sit down," I repeated. Something in my voice must have gotten through because she moved to the chair across from me. I leaned back, studying her face. "Let me ask you something. When you were typing up these commandments, when you were researching and planning and deciding how I should live my life, did it occur to you that you might be crossing a line?" "I'm trying to save our marriage," she said, "by making me a prisoner in my own home, by creating structure and expectations, by making sure we're both contributing equally." "Equally." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Show me where your commandments are. Show me the list of rules you'll be following." She straightened in her chair. "I created the system. I'm implementing it. That's my contribution." So you get to be the warden, and I get to be the inmate. That's your idea of equality. You're being dramatic. I stood up and walked back to the refrigerator, pulling the paper down and holding it in my hands. 10 commandments, 10 rules for how to be a husband, 10 ways to turn a marriage into a dictatorship. You know what's interesting about commandments? I said, turning back to face her. They only work if the person receiving them believes in the authority giving them. She looked confused. What's that supposed to mean? I folded the paper in half, then in half again. It means you can type up all the rules you want. You can laminate them, post them, and demand signatures. But here's the thing you forgot to research during all your planning. I walked over to the trash can and dropped the folded paper inside. I don't recognize your authority to command me. The silence that followed was deafening. She stared at the trash can like I had just burned down her entire world, which in a way I suppose I had. You threw away my commandments, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I threw away a piece of paper, I corrected. The commandments were never real to begin with, but I was wrong about that. Over the next few days, I learned that just because I didn't recognize her authority didn't mean she was going to stop trying to exercise it. It started the very next morning. I was getting ready for work when she appeared in the bathroom doorway holding a printed schedule. According to commandment number 9, she announced, you need to be finished in here by 7:15 so I can begin my morning routine. I looked at her reflection in the mirror while I shaved. According to common sense, people use the bathroom when they need to use it. The schedule prevents conflicts and ensures efficiency. I rinsed my razor and turned to face her. The schedule doesn't exist anymore, remember? Trash can. I printed new copies, she said, holding up the paper. And I've already begun implementing the consequences for violations. Consequences? I dried my face with a towel. What consequences? She pulled out her phone and showed me a detailed log. Yesterday, you arrived home at 6:45, which violated commandment number 1. You also made plans to play basketball with your friends on Saturday without my approval, violating commandment number 3. I stared at the phone screen. She had actually created a spreadsheet tracking my supposed violations, complete with timestamps and penalty points. This is insane, I said. This is accountability, she replied. As a result of your violations, your social privileges are suspended for 1 week. My social privileges? I couldn't help but laugh. Lady, I'm not in military school. You're in a marriage that needs structure, she shot back. And if you can't follow simple guidelines, then you need to face the consequences until you learn. I walked past her toward the bedroom to get dressed. The only thing I'm learning is that my wife has lost touch with reality. But she wasn't done, not even close. That evening, I came home to find sticky notes covering half the house. Each note detailed a specific violation of her commandments and the corresponding penalty. The coffee mug I had left in the sink that morning earned me a violation of commandment number 7. The fact that I grabbed lunch with a coworker without texting her first was apparently a breach of commandment number 5. What is this? I asked, pulling sticky notes off the kitchen counter. Documentation, she said, appearing from the living room with a clipboard. I'm keeping detailed records of all violations so we can track your progress. My progress toward what exactly? Becoming a better husband. I crumpled up one of the sticky notes. By whose definition? By the definition we agreed upon when we got married. We never agreed to any of this, I said, gesturing around the kitchen. This isn't marriage, this is a prison. You're being dramatic again, she said, making a note on her clipboard. And raising your voice counts as a violation of commandment number 6. I watched her write down my latest infraction and realized something important. She actually believed this was working. In her mind, she was fixing our marriage by turning it into a corporate compliance program. The breaking point came 3 days later when I found her setting up what she called a violation review meeting at the kitchen table. She had printed out charts, graphs, and a detailed analysis of my behavior patterns. Sit down, she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. We need to discuss your performance this week. My performance. I remained standing. I'm not your employee. You're my husband, and you're failing at it, she said bluntly. According to my analysis, you've committed 17 violations in 5 days. That's an average of 3.4 violations per day, which indicates a clear pattern of disrespect and non-compliance. She actually had pie charts showing my violations broken down by category, late arrivals, unauthorized purchases, failure to complete assigned tasks, and something she labeled attitude infractions. Look at this data. she continued, pointing to a bar graph. Your violation rate is actually increasing, which means the current consequence system isn't providing adequate motivation for behavioral change. I sat down, not because she told me to, but because I needed a moment to process what I was seeing. My wife had turned our marriage into a performance review. Therefore, she continued, I'm implementing enhanced consequences. Social restrictions will be extended to 2 weeks. Additionally, you'll be required to complete additional household tasks to demonstrate your commitment to improvement. She slid a new list across the table. More chores, more restrictions, more rules, all designed to make me more compliant with her vision of what a husband should be. Enhanced consequences, I repeated slowly. Exactly. Think of it as a corrective action plan. I looked at her sitting there with her charts and graphs and clipboards, completely convinced that she was solving our problems. She had turned into a stranger, a controlling, obsessive stranger who thought she could manage me like a project. Can I ask you something? I said. Of course. When you were planning all this, when you were creating spreadsheets and violation logs and corrective action plans, did you ever stop to consider what you were actually doing? I was creating a framework for a successful marriage. You were creating a dictatorship, I said. And dictatorships only work when people accept the dictator's authority. Her face hardened. I'm not a dictator. I'm your wife trying to make our relationship work. No, I said, standing up. You're a control freak trying to turn me into your personal project. And here's the thing about projects. They're not people. They don't have feelings, or opinions, or the right to make their own decisions. I walked around the table and looked down at all her charts and graphs. But I'm not your project. I'm your husband. And husbands don't get managed. They get respected. Respect has to be earned, she said. You're absolutely right, I agreed. It does, which is why you're not getting any more of mine until you remember how to give it. I headed toward the stairs, leaving her alone with her violation charts and performance metrics behind me. I heard her voice, sharper now, more desperate. Where are you going? We're not finished with this meeting. I paused at the bottom of the stairs and looked back at her. Actually, we are, because I just implemented my own commandment, and unlike yours, mine doesn't need a signature to be binding. She followed me upstairs, clipboard still in hand, demanding to know what I meant by my own commandment. I didn't answer that night. Instead, I let her wonder while I took my time figuring out exactly how to handle this situation. The next morning I came downstairs to find fresh copies of her commandments posted throughout the house. Kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, even taped to the inside of the front door. She had also left another violation log on the kitchen counter documenting my failure to participate in her performance review meeting. I poured myself coffee and sat down at the table where she had left everything. Her charts, her graphs, her detailed analysis of my behavior. I studied it all while I drank my coffee. And then I did something she wasn't expecting. I started laughing, not angry laughter or bitter laughter, but genuine amusement at the absurdity of what I was looking at. A grown woman had spent hours creating performance metrics for her husband, like he was a quarterly sales report. She appeared in the doorway, already dressed for work, watching me suspiciously. What's so funny? She asked. All of this, I said, gesturing at her paperwork, the charts, the violations, the enhanced consequences. It's hilarious. Our marriage isn't a joke. You're right, I agreed. But this isn't marriage. This is middle management with a marriage license. I stood up and walked over to where she had posted her latest copy of the commandments on the refrigerator. I read through them again, still chuckling. Can I ask you something? I said without turning around. What? How do you think this ends? In your head, what's the successful outcome here? You follow the guidelines and we have a better relationship. I turned to face her. And if I don't, then you face escalating consequences. Until you do. And if I still don't? She hesitated for the first time since this whole thing started. Then we'll have to consider more serious measures. More serious measures? I repeated. Like what exactly? Like marriage counseling or separation? There it was. The threat she had been building up to all along. Follow her rules or lose her. The ultimate control tactic. I nodded slowly. That's actually very helpful. Thank you for clarifying your position. Good. So, you'll sign the agreement? No, I said. But I will share my commandment with you now. I walked over to the notepad by the phone and wrote something down. Then I tore off the page and handed it to her. She looked down at what I had written. One simple sentence. I will not be controlled. She stared at the paper for a long moment. That's it? That's your commandment? That's it. That's not even a real commandment. It doesn't tell you what to do. Exactly, I said. It tells me what not to accept. And starting right now, I'm not accepting any more attempts to control me. I took my coffee and headed toward the door. Have a good day at work. Wait, she called after me. What does that mean exactly? I paused in the doorway. It means your commandments, your violation logs, your consequences, and your enhanced measures have exactly as much power as I choose to give them. I smiled. And I choose to give them none. You can't just ignore the rules. Watch me. And I did. Over the next few days, I demonstrated exactly what my commandment meant in practice. When she tried to enforce her curfew, I came home when I felt like it. When she demanded approval for my purchases, I bought whatever I wanted. When she assigned me household tasks with deadlines, I completed them on my own schedule, or not at all. But here's the key. I wasn't being destructive or irresponsible. I was being normal. I was living like a regular adult in his own home, making reasonable decisions about his own life. The difference was that I was no longer seeking her permission or approval for basic adult activities. She escalated quickly. More violation logs, longer consequence lists, increasingly desperate attempts to reassert control. She even tried recruiting her sister to call and lecture me about being a better husband. That's when I knew she was starting to panic. The turning point came on Friday evening when I walked in to find her setting up another performance review meeting with even more elaborate charts. Sit down, she commanded. We need to address your complete disregard for our marriage structure. I looked at her setup, bigger charts, more detailed analysis, even a PowerPoint presentation queued up on her laptop. You know what I find fascinating about all this? I said, not sitting down. What? You've spent more time in the last 2 weeks analyzing my behavior than you've spent actually talking to me as your husband. I talk to you constantly about improving your performance. You talk at me about compliance. That's not the same thing. I walked over to her laptop and closed it. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to put away your charts and your logs and your violation tracking systems. I am not. Yes, you are. Because I'm implementing the second part of my commandment. What second part? I sat down across from her, but not because she told me to, because I was choosing to have this conversation. The second part is this: I will not enable controlling behavior by pretending it's normal. She looked confused. What does that mean? It means I'm done playing along with this game. No more pretending your commandments matter. No more acting like your violation logs are legitimate. No more treating your consequences like real punishments. I leaned forward. You want to track my violations? Go ahead. You want to assign me consequences? Knock yourself out. But don't expect me to participate in your fantasy that any of it has meaning. You're being impossible. I'm being honest. For the first time in weeks, I'm being completely honest about what this really is. And what is it? It's you trying to control me because you're afraid of something. And instead of talking about whatever you're afraid of, you decided to become a dictator. Her face flushed. I'm not afraid of anything. Then why do you need to control every aspect of my life? I don't. 10 commandments say otherwise. She stood up abruptly. Fine. If you won't follow reasonable guidelines for our marriage, then maybe we don't have a marriage worth saving. There it was again, the ultimate threat. But this time, instead of giving her the reaction she wanted, I just nodded. Maybe we don't, I agreed. But we definitely don't have one worth saving if it requires me to surrender my dignity to keep it. What happened next was exactly what I expected. She doubled down. When I came home that night, I found the house transformed into what looked like a military command center. She had posted violation notices on every surface, created a detailed schedule for my weekend activities, and even left a formal written warning about my insubordination taped to the bathroom mirror. But something was different this time. There was an edge of desperation to it all. The handwriting was messier, the charts less organized. She was losing control of her own control system. I walked through the house, calmly removing each notice and violation log, dropping them all in the trash without reading them. She watched from the kitchen doorway as I systematically dismantled her entire operation. Stop destroying my documentation, she said, but her voice lacked the authority it had carried before. I'm not destroying anything important, I replied, pulling down another chart. Just clearing out some clutter. Those are official violations. You can't just ignore them. I paused and looked at her. Official according to who? The International Marriage Authority? The Department of Household Compliance? According to our marriage agreement. We never agreed to any of this, I said. You created it unilaterally and demanded I follow it. That's not an agreement. That's a dictatorship. She tried a different approach. Fine, let's negotiate then. What changes would you make to the commandments? None, I said simply. Because I don't negotiate with dictators. I'm not a dictator. Then stop acting like one. Over the next few days, I watched her cycle through every manipulation tactic in the book. She tried guilt, telling me how hurt she was by my lack of cooperation. She tried logic, explaining how her system would benefit both of us. She even tried seduction, thinking she could distract me from the real issue. None of it worked because I had made my position crystal clear. I would not be controlled. The real test came when she decided to escalate to public pressure. I was having lunch with my friend Dave when she showed up at the restaurant unannounced. She sat down at our table without being invited and immediately launched into her prepared speech. I need to talk to both of you about something important, she announced. My friend Dave looked confused. She turned to him, clearly expecting him to side with her. My husband has been refusing to follow basic marriage guidelines that I've established for our relationship. Guidelines? Dave repeated. 10 simple commandments that would help us have a more structured, successful marriage. Nothing unreasonable, just basic expectations about communication, responsibility, and respect. She pulled out her phone and started showing Dave her violation tracking spreadsheet. He's accumulated over 30 violations in 2 weeks. He refuses to follow agreed-upon schedules, ignores household responsibilities, and completely disregards the consequence system. Dave looked at the spreadsheet, then at me, then back at her. You're tracking his violations, like in a spreadsheet. It's important to document patterns of behavior so we can address them systematically. Right, Dave said slowly. And he agreed to this system? Marriage requires structure and mutual accountability, she said, avoiding the question. That's a no, I said calmly, taking a sip of my water. Dave looked between us, like he was watching a tennis match. So you created a list of rules for your husband to follow, and when he doesn't follow them, you track it in Excel. It's about creating clear expectations, she insisted. It's about control, I corrected. And I don't do control. She turned to Dave, clearly expecting him to side with her. Don't you think marriages need structure? Don't you think spouses should be accountable to each other? Dave shifted uncomfortably. I think marriages need communication and respect, he said. But this, he gestured at her phone. This looks like you're managing him like an employee. I'm trying to improve our relationship. By treating your husband like a child who needs constant supervision? Dave asked. Her face flushed red. You don't understand. He's completely irresponsible. He comes home whenever he wants, makes decisions without consulting me, and refuses to contribute equally to household management. Sounds like he's acting like an adult, Dave said with a shrug. That was when she realized her public humiliation strategy had backfired spectacularly. Instead of gaining an ally, she had revealed to an outsider just how ridiculous her behavior had become. She gathered her phone and purse, standing up abruptly. I can see I'm not going to get any support here. You'd get support if you were asking for something reasonable, I said. But you're not asking for support, you're asking for validation of your need to control me. She left without another word, but I could see the wheels turning in her head. Her public approach had failed. Time for her to try something else. That something else came the next evening when I arrived home to find her mother sitting at our kitchen table. We need to talk, her mother announced as I walked in. Hello to you too, I said, hanging up my jacket. My daughter tells me you're refusing to be a good husband. I looked at my wife, who was standing behind her mother with that smug expression she wore when she thought she had backup. Your daughter tells me a lot of things, I said. Most of them lately involve spreadsheets and violation logs. Her mother looked confused. What? My wife quickly jumped in. I've been trying to create structure in our marriage, and he's been completely uncooperative. What kind of structure? Her mother asked. I walked over to the refrigerator where my wife had posted yet another copy of her commandments and handed it to her mother. The kind where grown men need permission to come home to their own houses, I said. Her mother read through the list, her expression changing with each commandment. When she finished, she looked up at her daughter with a mixture of confusion and concern. Honey, she said slowly, this looks like rules for a teenager. They're guidelines for a successful marriage. They're control mechanisms, I corrected, and I don't follow them because I'm not her employee, her child, or her prisoner. Her mother set the paper down on the table. Sweetheart, she said to my wife, Marriages are about compromise and communication, not this. I watched my wife's face as she realized her own mother wasn't going to support her control system. The desperation was becoming more obvious. "But he won't even try to work with me," she pleaded. "Because working with someone implies mutual respect," I said. "And there's nothing mutual about a system where one person makes all the rules and the other person is expected to follow them without question." Her mother nodded slowly. "He has a point, honey. This isn't how healthy relationships work." And just like that, my wife's second attempt at recruiting allies had failed even more spectacularly than the first. After her mother left that night, something shifted in the house. The desperate energy that had been driving her control campaign seemed to deflate. She spent the evening in the living room staring at her laptop screen, occasionally typing and deleting. I found her there the next morning, surrounded by crumpled papers and empty coffee cups. She'd been up all night, and it showed. "What are you working on?" I asked. Not because I cared about her latest scheme, but because she looked genuinely defeated for the first time in weeks. "Revised guidelines," she said without looking up. "Maybe if I adjust the approach, make them more collaborative." "There's no collaborative way to control someone," I said, sitting down across from her. "I'm not trying to control you. I'm trying to save our marriage." "By doing what exactly? Creating commandments too? Maybe with charts in different colors this time?" She finally looked at me, and I saw something I hadn't seen before. Fear. Real, genuine fear. "I don't know what else to do," she admitted. "You could try talking to me like I'm your husband instead of your subordinate." "I have been talking to you." "No, you've been managing me. There's a difference." She closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair. I need to know that you're committed. I need to know that you care about making this work. And you thought the best way to test my commitment was to see how much of my dignity I'd surrender. That's not what I was doing. That's exactly what you were doing. You created a system where the only way to prove I love you is to let you control me." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that surprised me. "My parents got divorced when I was 12. My dad just left one day. Said he couldn't handle my mother's expectations anymore. And you thought you had enough rules, enough structure. I couldn't leave. I thought if we had clear guidelines, we wouldn't end up like them." For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than irritation toward her. Not sympathy exactly, but understanding. "So you decided to become your mother?" Her face crumpled. "I'm nothing like my mother." "Really? Because creating impossible standards and then punishing people for not meeting them sounds pretty familiar." She stared down at her hands. "I just wanted us to work. We were working, until you decided I needed to be fixed. You never talked to me anymore. You came home late. You made plans without telling me. You seemed distant. So instead of asking me what was wrong, you decided to regulate my behavior. I tried talking to you. You always said everything was fine." She had a point there, but it didn't justify what came next. "So your solution was to treat me like a project instead of your husband. I thought if we had structure, if we both knew what was expected." "Expected by who? You never asked me what I expected. You just decided what I should be doing and created a system to enforce it." She pulled out her phone and showed me something new. Not a violation log this time, but a draft email. "I was going to send this to a marriage counselor," she said, "to ask for help with your non-compliance issues." I read through the email. It was written like a complaint to human resources about a problem employee, complete with documentation of my infractions and requests for professional intervention. "Non-compliance issues," I repeated. "Listen to yourself. You're talking about your husband like he's malfunctioning equipment. I don't know how else to talk about it. Try starting with my husband and I are having communication problems, instead of my husband refuses to follow my rules." She deleted the draft email while I watched. "What if we started over?" she asked quietly. "Started over how? No commandments, no tracking, just talking. About what? About why you seemed so distant, about what I was afraid of, about how we got here." I looked at her sitting there, finally asking the right questions, weeks too late. "And if I tell you what was bothering me, you won't try to create rules to fix it?" "No rules." "And if you tell me what you're afraid of, I won't dismiss it or minimize it?" "No dismissing." "And we both agree that neither of us gets to control the other one?" "No controlling." I nodded slowly. "That sounds like the beginning of an actual conversation." She looked relieved, but I wasn't done yet. "But first, you need to understand something. All those commandments, all those violation logs, all those consequences you've been threatening me with for weeks, they never had any real power. The only power they had was what I chose to give them. I know that now. Do you? Because for a minute there, you actually thought you could manage me into being the husband you wanted, instead of appreciating the husband you had. You're right. And you thought that threatening to leave me would make me more compliant instead of just proving that you never understood me at all. Her voice was barely a whisper. You're right about that too. Good. Because the man you married doesn't respond to threats or ultimatums or control systems. He responds to respect and partnership and actual communication. I stood up and looked down at all her crumpled papers and abandoned schemes. So if you want to start over, we start with you understanding that I'm not your employee, your project, or your problem to solve. I'm your partner, and partners don't command each other. She nodded, finally understanding what I had been trying to tell her all along. Partners collaborate. That conversation marked the beginning of the end of her commandment system, but it wasn't an instant transformation. Old habits die hard, especially when those habits involve control. Over the next week, I watched her struggle with the reality of what partnership actually looked like. She would catch herself starting to ask where I was going, then stop mid-sentence. She would begin to assign me tasks, then remember that wasn't how this worked anymore. The real test came when I told her I was going out with Dave on Saturday night. What time will you be back? She asked automatically. When I'm done, I replied. She opened her mouth to say something, then closed it. I could see her fighting the urge to create a curfew, to demand a specific time, to establish consequences for being too late. Okay, she said finally. Okay, have fun. It was such a simple exchange, but it represented everything that had been missing from our relationship. Trust, respect, the basic understanding that adults don't need permission to live their lives. I came home at 11:30 that night to find her reading in bed, not tracking my arrival time in a spreadsheet. How was your night? She asked. Good. Dave says hi. Good. And that was it. No interrogation, no violation log, no lecture about responsibility. Just normal conversation between two people who trusted each other. But the most important moment came the following Tuesday when she approached me with something that looked suspiciously like a list. I made something, she said hesitantly. But it's not commandments. I looked at what she had written. It was titled Things We Could Work On Together, and it contained suggestions, not demands. Ideas for improving our communication. Proposals for sharing household responsibilities. Questions about our long-term goals. See the difference? She asked. No consequences, no tracking. Just things we could discuss, if you want to. I see the difference, I said. And I appreciate it. We spent that evening actually talking, not her lecturing me about compliance, not me rejecting her attempts at control, just two married people discussing their relationship like adults. She told me about her fears, about watching her parents' marriage fall apart, about feeling like she was losing me and not knowing how to fix it. I told her about feeling suffocated, about how her increasing need for control had made me want to distance myself, about how being treated like an employee in my own home had been destroying my respect for her. I turned into everything I hated about my mother, she admitted. And I almost turned into your father, I replied, ready to walk away instead of fighting for what we had. What changed your mind? My commandment. The one about not being controlled. It wasn't just about rejecting your rules. It was about refusing to let fear control either of us. She nodded. Your fear of being controlled, and my fear of being abandoned. Exactly. But here's what I learned. You can't control someone into staying with you. You can only love them enough that they want to stay. And you can't abandon someone just because they're afraid. You have to help them work through the fear. We talked until almost midnight that night, real conversation, the kind we used to have before she decided I needed managing, and I decided she needed resisting. The next morning I found her in the kitchen taking down the last of her commandment copies. She looked at me as I came in. I'm throwing them away, she said. Good. All of them. The charts, the logs, everything. Even better. She hesitated for a moment. Do you think we can make this work without all the rules and structure? I walked over and took the papers from her hands, dropping them in the trash myself. We were making it work before you decided we needed fixing. We can make it work again. She looked relieved but uncertain. How do I know I won't slip back into old patterns? The same way I know I won't slip back into mine. We pay attention. We communicate. We remember what we learned. And if I start getting controlling again, then I'll remind you that partners don't command each other. And if I start getting distant, you'll remind me that partners don't abandon each other. She smiled for the first time in weeks. So, what's our new system? No system. Just marriage. Real marriage. The kind where two people respect each other enough to work together instead of trying to control each other. That sounds terrifying. It is. Because it requires trust instead of control. But it's also the only kind of marriage worth having. She threw away the last of her charts and turned to face me. So what now? You remember why we got married in the first place? Because we chose each other. Not because we could control each other, or because we followed the right rules, but because we actually wanted to build a life together as equals, as partners, she said. And I could see something in her eyes that had been missing for weeks. Not the desperate need to control, but the quiet confidence of someone who finally understood what partnership actually meant. One commandment, she said quietly. What? You had one commandment that destroyed my 10. I will not be controlled. It was more powerful than everything I created because it was about principle, not rules. Principles don't need enforcement, they enforce themselves. And what's my principle now? I asked. She thought about it for a moment. I will not try to control what I should trust. She repeated it slowly, testing how it felt. I will not try to control what I should trust. That works for you? That works for me. And just like that, we stopped being commander and subordinate and went back to being husband and wife. It took one commandment to destroy 10, and 0 commandments to build something better. Our story has come to an end. If you've made it this far, how about subscribing to our channel? It helps us immensely. I've selected 2 other videos for you that I'm sure you'll enjoy. Feel free to click on them. I'll be waiting for you in the next story. See you soon.